On a cold March morning in the year 1133, in the town of Le Mans in France, a boy was born who would grow up to change the destiny of England and much of Western Europe. His name was Henry, the son of Geoffrey Plantagenet, Count of Anjou, and Matilda, the daughter of King Henry I of England. From the moment of his birth, Henry's life was intertwined with ambition, conflict, and the relentless pursuit of power. His father, Geoffrey, was a proud, strong-willed nobleman with a reputation for determination and cunning. His mother, Matilda, was equally formidable, a woman of royal blood, fiercely intelligent, and utterly convinced that she was the rightful heir to the English throne. Henry's childhood was shaped by a world teetering on the edge of chaos. When his grandfather, King Henry I of England, died in 1135, the carefully laid plans for succession collapsed. Despite Henry I's insistence that Matilda would inherit his crown, the throne was seized by her cousin, Stephen of Blois. England was plunged into nearly 2 decades of civil war, a period historians would later call the Anarchy. For the young Henry, these early years were not spent in the comfort of a peaceful royal court, but in the unstable courts of Anjou and Normandy, where survival depended on wit, loyalty was fleeting, and strength ruled above all. From an early age, Henry exhibited traits that set him apart. He was quick to learn, fiercely determined, and uncommonly energetic. He received a rigorous education in Latin and law, skills that would later underpin his reforms as king. At the same time, he mastered horsemanship, military tactics, and the brutal art of medieval warfare. By the age of 9, he had witnessed enough bloodshed and political intrigue to understand that kingship was not a gift, but something that had to be taken and kept by force. In 1147, at the mere age of 14, Henry made his first bold move on the stage of history. Gathering a small force of mercenaries, he sailed to England to support his mother's claim to the throne. The campaign was ill-fated. His army was too small, his resources too limited, and his cause not yet ripe. Within months, he was forced to return to Normandy, but the attempt had sent a clear message to both friend and foe alike. This was a young man of ambition who would not quietly accept defeat. Over the next few years, Henry's fortunes rose dramatically. When his father died in 1151, Henry inherited the counties of Anjou and Maine, adding them to Normandy, which had already come under his control. At just 18 years old, he was one of the most powerful lords in France. Then, in 1152, he made a marriage that would alter the balance of power in Europe. He wed Eleanor of Aquitaine, one of the most influential women of the age and the recently divorced wife of King Louis VII of France. Eleanor brought with her the vast and wealthy Duchy of Aquitaine, effectively placing nearly half of modern France under Henry's influence. The union was not merely a romantic match, it was a masterstroke of political strategy, and it made Henry a rival too powerful for the French king to ignore. By 1153, Henry's eyes were firmly set on England. King Stephen's reign was crumbling. Years of civil war had drained the kingdom of strength, and with the death of his only son, Stephen's grip on power was weakening. Henry launched another invasion, this time with stronger backing and greater determination. After months of fighting, Stephen agreed to the Treaty of Wallingford, recognizing Henry as his heir. When Stephen died in October 1154, Henry crossed the Channel and was crowned King Henry II of England at just 21 years old, becoming the first monarch of what would later be known as the Plantagenet Dynasty. Henry's ascension marked the beginning of a new era. The kingdom he inherited was shattered by years of lawlessness and anarchy. Castles had sprung up illegally across the countryside. Nobles had grown accustomed to acting as petty kings in their own right, and royal revenues had plummeted. Henry wasted no time in restoring order. He ordered the destruction of unauthorized castles, reasserted royal authority over the barons, and revived the financial administration of the crown. His energy seemed boundless. He traveled constantly across his domains, inspecting, reforming, and ruling with an iron hand. One of Henry's most enduring legacies was his reform of the legal system. Determined to create a more consistent and centralized form of justice, he introduced traveling royal judges, standardized procedures, and established what would later evolve into English common law. These changes limited the arbitrary power of local lords and laid the foundation for a legal tradition that continues to influence the world today. Yet Henry was not content to merely restore England. He sought to build an empire. His territories stretched across the Channel, from Scotland in the north to the Pyrenees in the south. Historians later called it the Angevin Empire, and it made Henry one of the most powerful rulers in Christendom. But such vast power brought him into inevitable conflict with rivals abroad and enemies at home. Among his greatest challenges was his relationship with the Church. In 1162, Henry appointed his close friend and loyal chancellor Thomas Becket as Archbishop of Canterbury. It was a calculated move. Henry believed Becket would support royal authority over the Church and help him curb clerical privileges. But Becket underwent a transformation. Once a pragmatic courtier, he became a staunch defender of ecclesiastical independence, opposing Henry's attempts to limit the Church's legal immunity. Their friendship soured into bitter rivalry, leading to a confrontation at the Constitutions of Clarendon in 1164, where Henry sought to assert royal control over church courts. Becket refused, fled into exile, and for years the two men waged a war of wills across England and Europe. The conflict reached its tragic climax in December 1170, when Becket returned to England and was brutally murdered in Canterbury Cathedral by 4 knights who believed they were acting on Henry's wishes. The king's alleged outburst, "Will no one rid me of this turbulent priest?" would echo through history as the spark that led to the archbishop's martyrdom. The murder shocked Christendom. Becket was canonized as a saint within 3 years, and Henry's reputation suffered deeply. To atone, the king performed public penance in 1174, walking barefoot to Canterbury Cathedral and allowing himself to be scourged by monks, a remarkable act of contrition for a medieval monarch. Despite this humiliation, Henry's power remained formidable. His reforms continued, his empire endured, and his authority seemed unshakable. Yet beneath the surface, the foundations of his rule were beginning to crack. His once passionate marriage to Eleanor of Aquitaine had soured. Years of Henry's infidelities and domineering behavior had driven a wedge between them. His sons, Henry the young king, Richard, Geoffrey, and John, grew restless, eager for lands and power of their own. By 1173, these tensions erupted into a full-scale rebellion. Backed by Eleanor and supported by foreign allies, Henry's sons rose in arms against their father in what became known as the Great Revolt. For over a year, the empire was racked by war, as Henry faced not only rebellious sons, but also attacks from the King of France and other enemies. Yet, once again, Henry's determination and strategic brilliance prevailed. He crushed the rebellion, captured Eleanor, and forced his sons into submission. The king had triumphed, but at a terrible cost. The family bonds were shattered, trust was gone, and the seeds of future betrayal had been sown. This was the height of Henry II's power, yet also the beginning of his downfall. In the summer of 1174, Henry II stood victorious over the greatest challenge to his reign. The Great Revolt had been crushed, his rebellious sons subdued, and his wife Eleanor imprisoned. Yet beneath the appearance of triumph, the king's world was beginning to fracture. His family no longer loved or trusted him, his allies were few, and age was beginning to take its toll. The man who had once been a relentless force of energy and ambition was about to face the most turbulent years of his life. Henry emerged from the rebellion hardened, but he was not a man to forgive easily. Though he released his sons from captivity, the bonds of affection were irreparably broken. His eldest, Henry the young king, was particularly resentful. Crowned during his father's lifetime as co-king of England, the young king chafed under the reality that he held no real power. He was a king in name only, expected to obey his father's will. This frustration, coupled with Henry's refusal to grant him lands and authority, festered into open hostility. At the same time, Henry faced renewed threats from abroad. King Louis VII of France had died, and his son Philip II now sat on the French throne. Unlike his father, Philip was cunning, ambitious, and relentless in his aim to dismantle the Angevin Empire. He would prove to be one of Henry's most dangerous foes. In 1177, Henry sought to stabilize his empire through diplomacy. He made peace with the King of Scotland, arranged marriages to strengthen alliances, and attempted to reconcile with the Church in the aftermath of Thomas Becket's martyrdom. But the underlying tensions within his family continued to boil. The first great blow came in 1183. The young king, having once again rebelled against his father, fell ill with dysentery during a campaign in Limousin. As death approached, he reportedly begged for his father's forgiveness. Henry, ever pragmatic, sent his signet ring to his dying son as a gesture of pardon, but he did not come in person. On June 11, 1183, Henry the young king died at just 28 years old. The grief that swept through the empire was immense, for despite his flaws, the young king had been widely admired for his charm and knightly spirit. For Henry, the loss was both a personal tragedy and a political calamity. His dreams of a smooth succession lay shattered, and his surviving sons, Richard, Geoffrey, and John, were no less ambitious or rebellious. Richard, the eldest surviving son and Duke of Aquitaine, was fiercely independent and determined to rule his duchy without interference. Geoffrey, ever the schemer, sought influence in Brittany and at the French court. John, the youngest, remained his father's favorite, but was untested and resented by his brothers for the favor he received. Henry's attempts to balance their ambitions only deepened their rivalries. Meanwhile, Philip II of France seized every opportunity to exploit the Plantagenet family's divisions. He flattered Richard, sowed distrust between father and son, and slowly chipped away at Henry's continental holdings. By the late 1180s, Richard had turned openly against his father, allying himself with Philip in a devastating campaign against the Angevin Empire. The situation grew worse in 1186 when Geoffrey, Henry's third son, died suddenly in a tournament in Paris. Geoffrey's death further destabilized the family dynamic and left only Richard and John as Henry's heirs. Philip capitalized on this loss, drawing Richard closer and persuading him that Henry intended to disinherit him in favor of John. Whether or not this was true, Richard believed it. By 1188, father and son were effectively at war. The final act of Henry's life unfolded in a storm of betrayal and defeat. In 1189, Philip and Richard launched a joint invasion of Henry's lands in France. The aging king, weakened by illness and exhausted from decades of struggle, could no longer muster the energy of his youth. His once mighty empire began to crumble under the combined assault of enemies abroad and treachery within. The breaking point came at the Battle of Balens in July 1189. Defeated and surrounded, Henry was forced to negotiate. In the ensuing peace talks, he discovered that even his beloved John had secretly joined Richard and Philip against him. The news devastated him. According to chroniclers, the king turned his face to the wall and whispered, "Now let everything go as it will. I care no more for myself or the world." Crushed in spirit, Henry withdrew to the castle of Chinon in Anjou. There, his health rapidly declined. Fever consumed him, and on July 6, 1189, Henry II died at the age of 56. At his bedside, few friends remained, and none of his surviving sons were present. He was buried at Fontevraud Abbey in France, far from the land he had fought so hard to rule. Henry's death marked the end of an era, but not the end of his legacy. His son Richard would succeed him as Richard I, known to history as Richard the Lionheart, and would gain fame as a Crusader king. Yet the foundations upon which Richard's glory rested, the centralized monarchy, the reformed legal system, the vast Angevin dominions, were all the work of Henry II. Henry had been a man of contradictions, brilliant yet ruthless, devoted to justice yet capable of cruelty, a loving father in moments yet a tyrant to his children. His reign transformed England from a fractured, war-torn realm into a powerful, organized kingdom whose influence stretched across Europe. His reforms in law and governance endured to this day, shaping not only England, but the broader Western world. And yet, for all his accomplishments, Henry's story ends as a cautionary tale of the costs of power. He built an empire greater than any English king before him, only to see it torn apart by the very family he sought to elevate. In the end, the man who had conquered so much could not conquer betrayal, and the crown he fought so hard to secure passed to the son who had turned against him. This was the life of Henry II, warrior, lawgiver, empire builder, and in the end, a tragic figure, a king whose vision outlasted him, whose shadow stretched long beyond his grave, and whose story still echoes through the halls of history.